Good morning, Journey Point. I hope you're well. Hey, my name is Chris, and I'm one of the pastors here on staff. I'm glad that you're here with us this morning. Hey, there was an educator that decided to do a kind of a sociology study of a man named Jonathan Edwards about 150 years after Jonathan Edwards passed away. Now, Jonathan Edwards is a famous kind of pastor and theologian in the 1700s. He, at age 13, I believe it was, 13, he attended Yale. And then he later on became the president of Princeton, right? And so this sociology wanted to kind of look at the family tree of this kind of big-time pastor theologian and see what that looked like. And then they were going to compare it to someone from his same time frame to go, let's compare these two family trees in this way. So here's the family tree of a man named Jonathan Edwards. There was one U.S. vice president, one dean of a law school, one dean of a medical school, 3 U.S. senators, 3 governors, 3 mayors, 13 college presidents, 30 judges, 60 doctors, 65 professors, 75 military officers, 80 public office holders, 100 lawyers, 100 clergymen, and 285 college graduates. Now, it didn't hurt that Edwards had 11 kids himself, so he was able to really influence a lot of this, right? So his family tree grew exponentially there. But that's a pretty good family tree. We would like to say that, man, I'd love to have that 150 years from now, right? So another prominent figure from the same time frame that they decided to study was a man named Max Jukes. And so Max Jukes had prominency for another reason. I think you'll find out why in just a second. The sociologist studied the family trees of 42 different men that were in the New York prison system that traced back to Jukes. He actually lived in New York same time as Jonathan Edwards, but as you may imagine, his kind of value systems and foundation for life were just a little bit different than Jonathan Edwards. Jukes' descendants included 7 murderers, 60 thieves, 190 prostitutes, 150 other convicts, 310 paupers or people that died in poverty, 440 who were physically wrecked by addiction to alcohol, and of the 1,200 family members and people that they looked at, the descendants, 300 died prematurely. What became known as, out of this study, was the 5-generation rule. It was talking about the ability for us to impact generation after generation. There was one quote from the study. It said, how a parent raises their child, the love they give, the values they teach, the emotional environment that they offer, the education they provide influences not only their children, but 4 generations to follow, the 5-generation rule. And obviously we know that influence is either for good or for evil, right? There's no kind of judgment there, one side or the other. We do have the ability to impact those generations either for good or for evil. The question that we can kind of wrestle with and have some tension with this morning is, what would someone 4 generations from now or 150 years from now look back on our family tree and say about its root from us? Right? That's something that we should think about, right? As followers of Jesus, or as even non-followers of Jesus that may be in the room or watching online, we have to think, what would 4 generations look like from now based on what I am intentionally doing with my life? The reason we're looking at this is because the title of today's message is Leaving a Legacy. And when we think about legacy, a lot of times we kind of look at the textbook definition of legacy, right? Which is how much money I get or the inheritance that is given to me as well, right? That's typically like the textbook definition of legacy, the money or the things or the inheritances and those things left behind to the next generation. But what I want you to walk away with this morning is this truth, and you'll see it on the screen. Legacy isn't about what you leave behind for people as much as it is what you leave behind in people, right? Legacy isn't what you leave behind for people as much as it is what you leave behind in the lives of those that you have the ability to impact. Edwards left something behind in the life of those people that he had an ability to influence in a great way that changed a family tree for generations to come, right? Turn with me, if you will, to Deuteronomy chapter 6. We're going to be looking at 6 verses today, Deuteronomy 6, verses 4 through 9. If you don't have a Bible, that QR code will get you straight to the verses this morning as well. You can click on it. It goes to something called a link tree, and then we'll take you right to the scripture reading. So you can pull that up, go there. As Adam mentioned, you can do a lot on that QR code as well. Keep up with what's going on all throughout the life of our church, fill out a Connect card. You can find the story, which is the one-year reading plan that we're walking through as a church. We're in a series out of that called Above All. But then last but not least, you can give back to God what is his through that app as well. So to catch you up kind of where we are like in the life of this like story that we're looking at, we talked about the Israelites last week. If you've been reading anything at all, you find out that like they would be a really hard people to lead. Like you'd be banging your head against the wall for a really long time with the Israelites. I mean, like Moses did. I mean, like he got frustrated time and time again, right? But so they're in the wilderness where we're picking up today for an additional 40 years because they didn't have faith in God that he could overcome walking into the promised land, right? So God says, all right, like you don't believe. And so we're going to walk around in the wilderness for 40 more years until you can actually go into the land that I promised you that I would give you. And what happens even to Moses, I think he becomes so frustrated that he's not listening to God clearly. God says to speak to a rock for water to come out of it for the people because they're complaining about water again. And Moses, instead of speaking to the rock, strikes the rock with his staff for the water to come out. And at that moment, God said, hey, you didn't obey me like I said, so you're actually not going to get to go in the promised land either. Right? And so Moses has had to deal with these people for a really long time. And then he doesn't even get to lead them into the promised land because he wasn't continually diving into what God was telling him to do. And so in Deuteronomy, we get in this kind of chapter, like it's kind of tough plowing in Deuteronomy. I mean, there's a lot going on and he's like really hammering them a little bit. And he's really kind of talking to them about what it looks like to live a life following God above everything else, right? In fact, if you get to Deuteronomy 31:9, and at that part at the end, it actually refers to the whole 30 chapters before as this law that Moses speaks. And what that means and gives us is that these 30 chapters, Deuteronomy 1 through 30, are basically like speeches or sermons or messages to these people to live a life above all following God, right? And so Deuteronomy is like him really pouring in right before he hands the reins to Joshua to take these people into the promised land. And so we're kind of in the middle of one of these speeches or talks that he has for these people at this time. And he's challenging them to follow God. Now, this kind of series of verses, this passage is historically for those with kids, but it's not. Right? Like we use it in that way, but it's really not just for children. It's about leaving a lasting legacy with those that you have the ability to impact, right? I mean, you have an ability to impact anyone at any given moment that God puts in your spheres of influence. It's not just kids, right? A great example of this is Libby's kind of second mom, if you will, a neighbor of hers lived next door to her since she was 2, even until today with her parents in Knoxville, Tennessee. She passed away unexpectedly on a cruise this week. And so this is like a second mom to her. And we were talking because we're going to go back and do the service and all this kind of stuff. I mean, the legacy that she has of the people that are around her, all these stories that people are telling, it's a legacy that she has left on, right? So leaving a legacy is not just for kids. It's not just transferring that into generation like Jonathan Edwards and these others. It's for anybody that you have the ability to impact in your life. Coworkers, neighbors, friends, you name it, you have an ability to leave a lasting legacy in their lives based on how intentional you are with it. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to read Deuteronomy 6, 4 through 9. I'm going to break it down into 4 ways I think we can live a lasting legacy in life. Deuteronomy 6:4 says this, listen, say the word listen, right? Come on, okay, I was just making sure you're paying attention. Listen, Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, and with all of your strength. Some of your Bible translations may say might. Verse 6 says, these words that I am giving you today are to be in your heart. Repeat them to your children. Talk about them when you sit in your house and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. Bind them as a sign on your hand and let them be a symbol on your forehead. Write them on the doorposts of your house and on your city gates. Let's pray. Father, thank you that we can take your word from thousands of years ago from Moses, speaking to a people that, quite frankly, are really just a lot like us today. We hear, we see, we take in the messages, but man, it's really hard to just live out. So I resonate so much with these Israelite people in my own relationship with you and obeying what you tell me to do. God, but thank you for the reminder that above everything else, a lasting legacy of faith in Christ is the only thing that will last. It's it. There's nothing else. money, stature, wealth, things, all of that will ultimately fade. But leaving a lasting legacy in our faith and with our faith in you will last a lifetime and more. We love you. We praise you. Speak to us through your word this morning. It's in your name we pray. Amen. The greatest way that you can leave a lasting legacy is to leave a lasting legacy in your faith, right? I said it a minute ago in the prayer, like no matter what you leave behind, no matter what you have that you pass on and give, anybody, you can just think in your mind right now of somebody that has spent an inheritance that they were given probably poorly, right? I have tons of examples of those. Or things that they get or receive and then just sell and they fade away, or stuff that we receive and then they sit up in our attics, right? And we hold on to them, we cherish them. This is my great-grandmother's thing that was so important that I keep it in my attic so that nobody ever sees it or we don't do anything with it, right? It's so important, I promise, that it's dusty and in a box that looks like it's 100 years old. Right? All of those things will fade, but like a faith in Jesus Christ is the only thing that you can leave behind for people to understand and walk through that will last no matter what. It'll last for eternity, right? And so in fact, these verses that Moses has, it actually lasts for a long time. We're still reading them today in 2022. Right? As a matter of fact, Moses has them there. It goes on. Jesus actually repeats them in 3 of the 4 gospel accounts. Like we see this actual phrase repeated to them in Jesus' time as he's talking to them. It becomes known as the Shema, right? This is a Jewish tradition. If you're around it, the Shema is still very important today. And the Shema basically means hear and do, right? And the Shema is something that they recite, they repeat because it says to recite it and repeat it. They listened to it and obeyed it, right? But we have to look at that it's not just a both and to hear this but not do it. Because what Moses was saying to these people was, hey, you need to listen up, Israel, but you also need to do this and live this out, right? Anybody know anybody that likes to hear a lot or take in a lot, but they don't actually do anything with it, right? No matter what that is. We have hobbies that we know all the information about. My wife could own Jeopardy for like useless information that you don't do anything with. And she's like, whatever. And I'm like, who cares about any of that stuff? It doesn't impact my daily life at all to know any of those things, right? And I'm like, so she wants to watch Jeopardy back to back with Wheel of Fortune, who she's also really good at too, by the way, because she knows all these words and phonics and all this stuff. And I'm like, whatever, I don't do anything with that. But you have to hear it and also do it is what Moses is saying, right? Moses says, don't just hear, but you have to do. You see, knowledge without action is useless. I can say that I love you, but if I don't put that into action, do I really love you? Knowledge without action is useless. Faith without actions is useless. You must hear or know and then do. Quite frankly, church in America today, where we are, or even if we want to go further and say a lot of our societal problems are because we know a lot of stuff, but we don't put into action what we know. Right? Where it says love your neighbor, but we don't want to do that. We understand that it says love your neighbor, but how do we practically live that out? A lot of the reasons we are where we are today is because we have all of this knowledge that we are not living out in our life the way that God commands us to. One of my favorite quotes is this: if your belief or knowledge doesn't lead to action, it isn't true belief. And if you have action without belief, your action ultimately falls flat. It is a both and. You have to believe it and live it out. And that's what Moses is telling them with verse 4 right here. We have a clear command to say, hey, we can hear this, but if we don't do this, then we haven't heard this, right? Is what Moses says. And so the reason I kind of stay on that for just a minute is because what you have to do as we read the rest of these verses and as we see these ways that we can leave a lasting legacy is you have to go, do I know this? Do I know this verse that we've said and has probably been taught on and all of these types of things, or am I actually living this out? There's a huge difference, guys. You have to live it and do it. So 4 ways to leave a lasting legacy in people, not just for them, but in people. And the first one is this: you have to make faith a priority. You have to make it a priority. Look what it says in verse 5 and 6. It says in verse 5, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. These words that I'm giving you today are to be in your heart. What he's saying here is like this Shema, this greatest commandment that he talks about in the gospel accounts with Jesus, like it's not just to be an abstract thought. Oh yeah, it'd be really good to love God with everything, with all my heart, with all my soul, with all my strength or mind. Yeah, it'd be great. No. What he's saying is like, you need to make this a priority to do this. Love God with all your heart. Love God with all your soul. Love God with all of your strength and all of your might. But not only that, in verse 6, it even says that, like, don't just do this on the periphery, but it's got to get so down and ingrained in us that it is buried within our heart, right? Like our heart pumping blood to the rest of our body. If that love is down deep-seated in our heart, it pumps loving God in everything else that we do, right? And that's what Moses is saying here. With your total being, with everything that you are, with all that God has given you, love him. Like, love him. The original translations for heart and soul here don't have like this kind of separate components meeting. It's not like removing them as like, okay, heart is over here and soul is over here or any of that. If you really dive into it, they overlap to mean our entire life. Our dispositions, our emotions, our intellect, everything that we are supposed to encompass this. And do you notice that it's an inside out, right? It's heart, soul, then strength and might, right? If it's inside, then it's going to become heart inside. Our soul is kind of talking about like our person or our being, and then our strength and our might or our mind becomes this intellect and things that we are doing, right? It starts from the inside out. When we love God with everything inside, it naturally is going to flow out of everything that we do, right? And so when we look at that, to make something flow from the inside out, like it has to be a priority. Like I'm hurting a little bit today because my Tennessee Vols lost yesterday and they shouldn't have, right? This is a prayer request. This is confession. Like I'm just letting you know. But like the reason I'm still like, I was like, even last night, I was like, why is this bothering me? Because like down in my heart, I am a deep-seated Tennessee Vol fan, right? I mean, I'm a graduate. I worked in the athletic department there. These are 18 to 22-year-old men that I have no idea who they are. I met a couple of them when they played Colorado this year, but outside of that, none of them are in existence of anything in my life. But because it is like deep-seated in my heart, it impacts like everything else, right? Like I needed a minute after the game. I was like, I need a minute, right? And so I'm sitting there going, man, because it's from the inside out. The question that you have to ask yourself in terms of priority is this. If we ask those generations below you or after you, if 150 years from now, people were going to say you prioritized your faith, would they say that you prioritized your faith the same way you prioritized blank? Maybe that blank for you is kids. Maybe that blank for you is sports. Maybe that blank for you is career. Maybe that blank for you is hobbies or vacations. Like, what would the priorities look like? What would people say, hey, yep, Chris prioritized his faith in Jesus the same way that he prioritized the Tennessee Vols basketball team? I hope not. I hope that they say, man, his faith was way up here, and this is just this thing that it comes, right? But we have to ask ourselves, what is it that we prioritize? What would other people say about us? It's been said before that many people take one step in 20 directions, where we should be taking 20 steps in one direction, right? There's a Chinese proverb that says, the man who chases two rabbits chases neither, right? Like I have 4 kids, so I feel like I'm never chasing the right thing. And it's like, man, what are we doing? And too often we're chasing or prioritizing or taking the 20 steps in different directions towards sports and kids and careers and neighbors and jobs and vacations and all of these things. And we never take the 20 steps in the right direction for our faith. Like we've got to chase the one rabbit. The one rabbit is the one that matters, that's going to leave a lasting legacy in other people. We call that around here the 5% life. And so we've said before, like we want to push everybody in the church to live the 5% life. And if you remember, that's 1% in God time daily. So that's 15 to 20 minutes daily engaged in some type of relationship with Jesus, whether that's praying or reading the Bible. We say that's 1% in gather time, right? You're doing that right now. Spending an hour a week just gathering with other people, hearing and talking about the things of God. 1% in group time, that's 6 to 7 hours a month that you're engaged with groups of people that are intentionally walking to grow in their faith and connect with one another in connect groups or disciple-making groups. We talk about 1% of your quarter in grow time. That's where we say, hey, I want to intentionally grow as a leader in the gifts that God's given me, and we want to help you do that. And so 1% growing in the gifts that God has given you from leadership development. We're going to have a big launch of that in May where we gather everybody together and talk about an intentional process to help you do exactly what God has called you to do. And then last but not least, we say 1% of our year, which is about 4 to 5 days in go time, which is serving locally, nationally, or internationally. Like, that's 5%. And the tagline there is, I guarantee you that if you give that 5%, the other 95% of your life will be changed. By just taking 20 steps in the right direction and stop chasing the 20 rabbits, right? Because the man who chases two has neither. Are you prioritizing leaving a lasting legacy in the life that God has placed around you, the lives of those that God's placed around you? The second thing is this, not only make a priority, but you need to make faith a resolution, right? Make faith a resolution. Think about intentionality here. Like, we have New Year's resolutions, and some of you may be like, well, I don't want to do a resolution because right now I'm not doing anything with my New Year's resolutions, right? But let's just think back to January or maybe December when you started planning these things, right? And here's what I mean by this. When you started planning that resolution, you tried to put a plan in place. Even though you may not have hit it right now, you put a plan in place, which means you started off on the right track to just go, yes, I want to lose X, Y, Z. Yes, I want to run X, Y, Z. Yes, I want to do these things in 2022. Make your faith the same resolution. What is your plan to get to where you're trying to go that God is calling you to do? Because look at Deuteronomy 6:7. It says this, repeat them to your children, right? So them being these words that I'm giving you today, repeat them to your children. And he goes on and says, talk about them when you sit down in your house, when you walk along the road, when you lie down, and when you get up. Like, when we read repeat them, that seems very systematic, right? Like, continually repeating something seems systematic. Some of your translations, or the way you heard this before, is teach them, right? Diligently to your children is what some translations say. My wife is a teacher, so I'm just going to brag on her for just a second. Like, to be a teacher, you have to be experienced or considered a professional expert in something, right? She is an experienced professional expert in first grade children and children pre-K, right? Like pre-K through whatever. She's early childhood education. She can teach any child pre-K through 4th or 5th grade at a high level. You know that she doesn't just go into teaching every day flippantly. Like, she's like, hey, I don't know, we'll work on naps today, or whatever else. Like, she's got a plan in place. I don't know if you know this about your kids and the schools that they go into, but they're taught at a curriculum level. They think about these things. There's plans that are put in place. I know, because when she's out of town or when she has a meeting and she has to put together substitute plans, and it's like, man, y'all really plan that much for first graders. And I'm like, man, I didn't know that, right? But there's intentionality behind it. They're resolved to get kids on grade reading level. They're resolved to get kids at levels that they need to for English and math and science and those types of things. Teachers are professionals. We also need to become professionals in understanding the words of God so that we can repeat them to those people around us. But sometimes we're just like, I want to take in. No. Taking in is not going to get us to where we can repeat them time and time again. If we're being really honest today, one of the things that we could say is that the next generation is further from God today because we've relied on the church to be the ones repeating everything to kids. Hey, let's go to church so that you can learn about God. Let's go to church so that you can learn about Jesus. Let's go to church so that you can do these things. I'm not really comfortable doing all this, so I'm just going to put that on the professionals over there in the church. I hope you know this. There are no professional Christians. This is my vocation, my calling. But I'm called to teach my children the things of God the same way that you're called to teach your children. You're called to teach the other people around you, neighbors, coworkers, friends, the things of God. Yeah. This isn't just for professionals or the Green Berets of Christianity, right? For those without kids, you're not off the hook. Leaving a legacy is more than just with children. It's the spheres of influence God gives us as well. How about when we meet a neighbor or a coworker? Are we ready to answer their questions about the things of God? How about when we meet somebody that is far from God, that has past burdens and experiences, and they have all of these thoughts and questions? Are we ready to do that? We're like, hey, no. I got a guy, his name's Chris, or his name's Adam. I'll send you to them. No. If we're taking these words and we're able to repeat them, that's on us personally and individually. The church is God's plan for the world, but guess what? The church is made up of people. We think about church as this building, but the church is God's plan, but the plan is the people of the church to repeat these words to those around. Do you know that all the problems that we have in America, the solution is sitting right in here? Yeah. You turn on the news and you see hate, guess what? The solution is in here. We know that we're supposed to love other people. We know the way that we're supposed to act with people that don't even agree with us, no matter the side of the equation that they're on. Like the problems that we have in America today are sitting right here in this room and in rooms all across the country just like this, honoring and worshiping God and learning about the things of God. If we would just not hear them, but also do them, right? You have to be resolved and intentional to lead people in the life of a Jesus follower. Do you know that people never drift into a relationship with God, always away from? Like, do you know anybody that's like, yeah, casually, like over time, they just kind of drifted into this relationship? No, it's always drifting out of a relationship. Why? Because people around them are not intentional and resolved to make a plan to talk to them about the things of God. And the same will be true with us. Your kids, your spheres of influence, your neighbors, they will not drift into faith because you are faithful. They won't drift into faith because they see you leaving to go to church on Sunday morning. It will be the way that you talk to them, react to them, and live life with them. You'll read a story in a couple of weeks if you're following along. There's this prophet named Eli, and he has these sons that are kind of maintaining what they're supposed to do as like these prophets, and these like, they're just in the church and they're doing these sacrifices and they do it poorly. And what you find out is that those kids didn't just take what dad was doing and it drifted into a natural, deep relationship with the Lord. He didn't spend time intentionally to repeat these words to them, and his kids ended up having consequences because of it. We all probably know, like, my biggest fear having 4 kids is pastors' kids, right? They're train wrecks sometimes. And I'm like, I got 4 of them that if I don't watch it, I'm going to have 4 train wrecks, you know? And so, like, some of the reason is because they were so busy in the church that they didn't focus on their kids. Because they thought that they would just drift into the relationship that mom or dad had. And that's just not the way it works. Make faith a resolution. Are you resolved to learn and teach the scriptures as you are your New Year's resolutions, your vacation plans, and your job leadership development pieces? Be resolved. Third thing is this: make faith a lifestyle. Deuteronomy 7, the last part of it, what does it say? It says at the last part, talk about them when you sit down in your house and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. The contrast here, right? Sitting and walking, lying down and getting up. What this means is like, it's all the time. It doesn't mean like actually only when I'm sitting down and only like when I get up or just when I'm lying down or whatever that may be, sitting and running. It means all of the time. Sitting is inactive, walking is active. Lying down is at night, getting up is in the morning. This means this needs to become a lifestyle. Like, following God should be at the center of everything that we do, that it should always ooze from everything that we do. This isn't just a Sunday morning thing or when we meet with my group thing, but this is a lifestyle change for us. Grocery store, shopping, kids' games, on a walk, neighbors over for dinner, running into Starbucks. No matter what, you have to make your faith a lifestyle if you're going to pass on that legacy to other people around you. There's no turning this on and turning this off. In every aspect of your life, in everyone that you are relating to, discussing your faith should be a prime importance. Now, that doesn't mean you walk up to somebody immediately and go, hey, by the way, did you know that I love Jesus? That's weird, okay? It is. It's strange. But I'm going to tell you what, you guys know that I love the University of Tennessee. You also know that I love my wife. You also know that I love my kids. Why? Those things are important to me, and it naturally comes out of my mouth. What I love and what is important to me and what I make a priority and what I'm resolved to talk about is going to come out of my mouth because it's going to be a lifestyle that I live. I don't care if you're introverted or extroverted. You talk about things that matter. And the question is, in your lifestyle, do the things of God matter? A lifestyle is expressed in kind of like work, behavior, leisure, social patterns, right? It combines our motives, our needs, our wants, our feelings, like all of these things are encompassed in our lifestyle. And we see lifestyles all around us, right? We know people that live like a CrossFit lifestyle. You don't even have to talk to them. They're going to tell you about it in a minute or two anyways, right? They say, how do you know if your friend's CrossFit? Just give them a minute. They're going to tell you, right? And like healthy lifestyles. How do you know if people live a healthy lifestyle? Well, you see them. They exercise, they eat right. They're going to tell you about their gluten-free, keto, whatever options that they have. They're doing that, right? How do you know that someone doesn't live a healthy lifestyle, they're probably typically from the South, right? That's me. I'm from the South. I can say this. It's like, I went home and a couple of weeks ago, I couldn't get a meal that like wasn't fried. And I was like, what in the world is happening here? And I'm like, man, I'm just kidding. That's a joke. I love the South. A bohemian lifestyle is for like this musical, like artistic, kind of spiritual nature type of person. A nomadic lifestyle, like we know people that are nomadic in nature, right? They're always bouncing around from one thing to the other or one place to the other, right? Like these lifestyles are all around us. And the kind of love that God requires is full-time, all the time, always on, and in every circumstance. It has to be a lifestyle. Like we have to see patterns of our behavior in our life that create or encompass this relationship with God, right? If you're in leadership or management, you know that one of the first things you have to do is walk in and create culture, right? Like you have to create the culture that you want because strategy gets eaten by culture, right? Culture eats strategy for breakfast, famous Covey statement. And so like you walk in and it's like, okay, we have this. If culture eats strategy for breakfast, and I need to begin building this culture. Well, I need to begin building a culture of a lifestyle that follows Jesus. Like if I want to live this lifestyle, I need to create that culture around me. I need to create norms in my everyday life that follow God, and it oozes out of me because these norms are set up. I need to set the tone in the place that I live. Like in my home, I need to be setting up a lifestyle of following Christ. Whatever I consume on TV, on social media, in blogs, in the books that I read, that's going to ooze out of my lifestyle, right? Frankly, too many of us are discipled by the TV or social media than we are by Jesus Christ. Like that's one of our problems right now. If I spend hours on end watching news stations and these types of things, but I'm only reading my Bible for 10 minutes a day, but I watch 2 hours of Fox News or CNN or CNBC, I don't care which side of the equation you're watching. Like we can't be discipled by those things and then act like we're going to live this lifestyle of a follower of Jesus. Those things are not pushing us to be followers of Jesus, right? And so we're discipled by that. We have to create that culture. How do you use your resources creates this lifestyle, and last, how you spend your time reflects on this lifestyle. What lifestyle would other people say that you live? Like you can't answer that, but ask someone else. Hey, if you were to define the lifestyle that I live, how would you define it? Would anybody say that it's a lifestyle of faith that comes to mind quickly and immediately? If you make it a priority, if you're resolved to do it and you're living this lifestyle, then yeah, they would say so. And last but certainly not least, if you're going to leave a legacy of faith in people, you need to make faith a community. It's got to be a community. Look at verse 8 and 9. When you look at verse 8 and 9, it says this. It says, bind them as a sign on your hand and let them be a symbol on your forehead. Write them on the doorposts of your house and on your city gates. If you walk outside right after this, we're going to have a group tattoo session with crosses on hands and foreheads. Anybody? A couple people look back. They were checking to see, right? You're not down for that, right? Right on the forehead, Jesus follower. Seriously though, this aspect of like putting this on our bodies and like in and around us, we do a little bit of this, right? We wear cross necklaces or we have or crosses on the home or like the Jesus fish on the car, but that doesn't work well when you cut somebody off. And so you have to be really careful with that. Like I want you to have a Journey Point sticker unless you're a really bad driver. And then, then they're like, I'm not going there, right? And so, but like homes and city gates, what really happened in this when Moses was doing it, you had these like what's called phylacteries and mezuzahs. And these things became like standards in the Jewish culture. The phylacteries literally were boxes that they would put around their head. We've talked about these in here before. There's this little box, and they would tie it around their head, and they would walk around with this thing on their head, right? And inside that box were like prayers and scriptures from Deuteronomy and the Shema and these types of things, so that people knew, I know who they are because they're followers of Jesus. They're followers of God, right? But this happens, like even in some cultures today, they still have phylacteries. The mezuzahs are things that they would put on their homes. Like on their homes, there are these little boxes that they would put on there, and inside those are scriptures and prayers and these types of things that were there, like so that everyone knew. What it encompasses is it's got to be a community effort, right? You can't do this alone. It takes a tribe to do this type of stuff. That's why we gather. That's why we have group time, because you cannot live out your faith in a lifestyle resolved and prioritized way unless you're doing it with other people with you. We live in the third loneliest city in America. And part of the reason is because we live in one of the most faithless cities in America, right? I don't think those two things are just by coincidence. If we live in the third loneliest city in America and we live in one of the most faithless cities in America, like, shouldn't we be the ones that change that? Shouldn't people be looking at us and go, man, that dude has got something that I want. And oh my gosh, he's got like a group of people around him that want it too. A community of people walking and locking arms together saying, you know what, I'm resolved to make my lifestyle one that reflects the life of Christ. We'll leave legacies when we do that. When people walk into your home, do they automatically get a sense of the presence of God? Like, when we come to church, is it like, are you just checking a box, or is this a community for you? Do you know the people in this room? Do you know their stories? Do you know their struggles? Do you know what they're walking through? Or do you just feel good after going back home and saying, I did that thing? Because living a lifestyle of the life of a follower of Jesus, if it's going to be a legacy that's going to be left for people from time and time and time again, generation to generation, it needs to be a community. You've got to prioritize it. You have to be resolved to do it or intentional. You've got to make it a lifestyle that you do, and it's got to be done inside of community. Why? Because leaving a legacy isn't about what you leave behind for people as much as it is what you leave behind in people. That's got to be our focus. And listen, every night when Jonathan Edwards was home, it's noted that he would spend an hour conversing with his family and then praying a blessing over each child, all 11 of them. An hour. He would sit and talk about the things of God and then pray over each child. He and his wife passed on this great godly legacy that the generations showed to be true 150 years later. And that sounds like a lot, doesn't it? I don't feel like I got an hour. The reason I don't have an hour is because I don't make it a priority. The reason I don't have an hour is because I've not put it in my schedule. I'm not resolved. It's not a resolution for me. The reason I don't feel like I have an hour is because maybe that's not the lifestyle of spending an hour with my kids going crazy that I want to live. Maybe I don't see that as the community, or I have other people holding me accountable to doing those types of things. Here's the legacy piece. Have you ever thrown a rock in a lake? When you throw a rock in a lake, the rock fades. Well, let's imagine this is like a glass lake early in the morning. Nobody else is out there. And you throw this rock. And what happens is the rock is gone, but what happens? There's ripples. And like there are ripples all around you. And you are leaving a legacy even after you're gone. The question is, what legacy are you leaving? So as Hunter and the team get ready to come back up here, that's the question for us. What legacy are you leaving? If people would ask you what legacy that you're leaving in and through them right now, what is it that they would say? Would they say that this lasting legacy is one that are going to last inside of them? Or are they just like, yeah, he gave me some stuff and I'm hoping to follow along with it? Or like, how intentional with it are you? Because you're the rock that's gone. And that legacy will be there no matter who it is, neighbors, coworkers, friends, you name it. The legacy moves on with people all around you. So let's bow our heads for just 1 minute. And during that time, I want you to really reflect and go, what legacy am I leaving? And when you walk out that door today, be resolved. Make it a priority. Start this lifestyle and do it with the people in this room to say that we're going to make a difference and a change. Take 1 minute and ask that question.